absolute pleasure to introduce Fred Lynch. He is a professor of illustration at Rhode Island School of Design, also his alma mater, in Providence, Rhode Island. He is the recipient of an award of excellence.
Take these chairs.
Illustrations that are published and exhibited all over the world. Fred's work has been featured in exhibitions, books, magazines, and on the Travel Channel. He grew up in Cumberland, Rhode Island, and has lived in Winchester with his wife Karen for 30 years. He has two sons, Henry and Owen. Tonight, Fred will share his decade-long project, visiting the relatives, drawing the past by place. Starting from his own home and working back in time, Fred followed genealogical research to the addresses of his immigrant forebears, taking him to unfamiliar places, sometimes within miles of his everyday life. There he sat and drew, bearing witness on paper until that little was known about where his family came from. So much was forgotten, lost, left behind. Drawing on became an act of exploration, reflection, and documentation. For this artist and educator, looking back was less sentimental than sobering. Tonight, he shares with us his American story. Please welcome Fred.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming, and thank you for being patient with my friends. Thank you, friends, and thank you, history lovers. Yes, my name is indeed Fred Lynch, and I'm from, well, that's really what I've been thinking about the last 10 years. Where am I from? Well, I certainly live in Winchester. I live right across town. I drove across town to get here. I've lived here for 30 years. In this house, which hasn't changed much at all. I mean, we don't have the moat anymore, and some of the walls we took down, but we've lived in our castle for a long time here. But people that know me, they know that I don't usually say I'm from Winchester, even though I've been here for so many years. I kind of say that I'm from Rhode Island. I still work in Rhode Island. I was there today molding the soft clay minds of Rhode Island School of Design. Only when they're sophomores is the clay soft. It gets hard really fast. And the seniors are unbudgeable. But I have the great pleasure of teaching these extraordinary young artists from all over the world. And the building that I teach in is still there at the bottom of that arrow. And when I'm in Providence, I have this sensation that I do come from there. I definitely come from families that were there. In 1911, there were 4 families living in neighborhoods around where I work. The O'Keeffes, the O'Connors, the Lynches, and the Colburns. At that time, they were completely unconnected. They became connected by marriages that led to, eventually, me. These 4 families were immigrant families back then, except for one who was the child of immigrants. One day I drew a house of my immigrant ancestor, Michael Lynch. How did I know it was Michael Lynch's house? In a house directory. I want to make sure it was the right house. They lived in the left-hand side of this house. My grandfather was a child in this house at that time when they lived there. And there's something about visiting your relatives that way, going to an old house that your family lived in, and just looking at it. So I'm an artist, and I bring my art supplies. I'm not a historian. I'm not a genealogist, I'm an artist by trade. I'm an illustrating. And illustration is a way of looking very closely at something. It's about really researching that thing before you. It's extrasensory. I would sit across the street and draw the house of my ancestor. I knew they lived there. The Lynches were particularly interesting to me because I carry that name. But of course, I come from a lot of families. And I've drawn a lot of places, most not associated with my family. Coliseum, or the Paul Revere house. I did a long project about Paul Revere's ride and drawing the places along that ride, and it was fun. I was in a museum, and we had a show in a nice museum in Lexington, and it was in the Boston Globe, and the work has been seen all over the place. But those are really fun. But there's something really, really unusual about looking at the historic sites of only your family. My father still lives in the house in the bottom left. That's where I grew up in Rhode Island. But when you go back and visit places that your family lived, they could very likely be gone. Particularly when you come from a poor family. That's a great place to run a highway. A lot of my ancestors lived where 95 goes through, Providence and Pawtucket, including where my father lived as a child. It occurred to me that I could match my interest of history, my questions of where do I come from, and the art practice that I have to maybe draw up a kind of family tree. I knew where to start. I didn't know much about my family. It just simply didn't come up very often. I knew that the 4 neighborhoods that I had already shown you, that's where they lived. That's all I kind of knew. I knew that from my parents. I also knew where they came from. They were immigrants. 3 of the families came from Ireland, 1 from Nova Scotia to work. The discoveries I found tracing the Lynches and the Colburns there, well, they have some interesting stories. Here's my grandparents. They taught me very little about fashion, but they did. That line works every time. But they would find my outfit remarkable. But my grandmother really liked to talk about. She was from Nova Scotia. She said, "I'm Nova Scotia Scottish," is what she'd say. And she would tell tall tales of the land of Nova Scotia in far northern Nova Scotia, where the men are strong, and well, you know all that, right? These were just remarkable people, and she almost never stopped. Oh, they did roofing, and they were ambidextrous, and they were 7'4", and they could do the whole roof in a half an hour. Like, they were just really remarkable stories. Cutting timber, nothing. My grandfather said nothing at all about the past. He was a very taciturn man who said nothing about the past. We knew he grew up poor. Maybe that's why he didn't want to talk about the past. If we asked questions, which we didn't, because we knew he doesn't talk about the past, there were gruff replies. So finding out where my ancestors lived took an extraordinary amount of research from all kinds of sources. As I said, I'm not a historian, so my digging was, I don't know, really immature, but I went deep, and that's why I'm not talking to you till about a decade after I started this. I went deep into all the records, all the first sources. I wanted to uncover the myths. I wanted to uncover the truth. I wanted to answer some questions. I had to dig for them. And online ancestry tools, such as Ancestry.com, Family Search, which is actually free, 23andMe, and a site called GEDmatch. And what they did was they isolated more clearly where I was from, who I was related to a certain degree, and allow me in the top two to build family trees. In the top right one, Family Search, allows you to join a universal family tree to which other connections can be made and surprising discoveries can be made as well. But I'll tell you, when you go to visit the places of your immigrant ancestors, it took me to neighborhoods I had never been to in the town that I thought I knew, which was Providence. And in the houses of the immigrant ancestors' history were immigrants. An immigrant neighborhood very often remains an immigrant neighborhood. And this is 125 or more years ago. Chelsea, Connecticut, and of course, New York. I would sit there, oddly sitting there, right? I mean, just imagine someone across from your house, sitting on a collapsible stool, with a pad on his lap, in your neighborhood, quietly drawing. That was me. I only did it once in Winchester, but it was my own house, so my wife really took it really well. She wasn't that confused. And things happen. I'll read you a short what happened when I was drawing in Chelsea. Often when I'm drawing, I think I'm invisible. People usually treat me that way too. People don't tend to interact with me. Where the O'Connors lived in Chelsea, Massachusetts in 1908, no one lives there now. At the address is a car repair shop, as well as a taxi business, surrounded by a tall chain-link fence. The property sits on a street of light industry by the railroad tracks. Visiting, I was immediately interested in drawing an old cab with 4 flat tires by the entrance. I mean, come on, this is a great thing to draw. It's really fun. However, the fence was closed and it was locked. Returning another day, the gate was open. Why did I return? Because my grandfather was born here. He was born on this property. So I came back another day. The gate was open. But a nicer taxi, like a really nice taxi, blocked the view of the one I wanted to draw. Time I came, the lighting was terrible, with the sun behind dark clouds. But being persistent, I returned a 4th time and stepped just inside the now open front gate and sat to draw with pleasure. I had caught my prey. Not long after I had settled in, however, a truck pulled up from across the long parking lot, and a gruff voice called out to me. "Excuse me," said the man in the truck with what I guessed European accent, not sure. I popped up and I swiftly walked over with my sketchbook to show him what I was up to. I was sure he'd be flattered and interested. I'm an artist and I'm making it, I said, I'm an artist and I'm making a drawing of this place where my immigrant ancestors lived way back. I blurted out into the open passenger side window. The man cut me off mid-sentence with an, "I don't care what you are doing." He made no eye contact. He looked straight ahead at the windshield. I tried again. I said, "My family came here long ago, and I'm drawing," and then I lost my page. Here it is. And I'm drawing this, and he cut me off again. He said, "This is my property," he sternly told his steering wheel. I quickly turned the page of my sketchbook to my drawing of a local church, and I told him that I was drawing all around the neighborhood. He turned to see the church drawing. "You must ask," he said. "You must ask to do things on my property." This was his place now. Beginning to feel uncomfortable, I then apologized profusely and asked politely if I could stay, and I told him that I meant no harm. He barely nodded and said, "You must ask people." I thanked him, and he drove back out of the lot, and not once had he looked at my face. Looking back, I should have asked. This was his place now, not mine. We come and go to certain places, and I'm really happy to announce that that doesn't happen very often. That was really scary. The only other really scary person was a housewife in Sudbury. I was drawing the most beautiful house of an ancestor, just a gorgeous house, and she came out with a baby on her hip. You know the look. And she said, "Can I help you?" You know, and that was scary. The taxi guy. That was. I somehow felt she could do more harm to me. I don't know why. But if we think about the Lynches and we go back to this one house they lived on the left-hand side, it really teaches you about how difficult this endeavor was. It sounds so idealistic and easy, and yet Michael Lynch, my great-grandfather, was mysterious. The only thing in the 1905 state lottery that was correct was the address and his name. The day, the month, and the year all were separately wrong. He doesn't know what day, month, or year he was born, or someone in the house doesn't know. The year he came was wrong. The number of years he had been in the United States was wrong. I didn't know where he was from in Ireland, and that was growing in my curiosity. People say, "Where are you from in Ireland?" I didn't know. When Michael Lynch died, he died of a skull fracture, an intracranial hemorrhage, cause not known. His death certificate was wrong, too. He wasn't 38 years old, he was 46 years old. I only know that years later. So I'm facing all these facts that don't lead anywhere for years, that contradict each other. And you know how I like to draw my ancestors' houses? I could have just drawn Michael Lynch and his family's houses. They lived in 9 homes in 16 years. They started off in New Bedford, had their first kid, my grandfather, in 1896. And moving and moving and moving. And Michael Lynch died at 46. His wife was pregnant. He had 4 kids, and they had had 3 children die within the first year of their lives, right in a row. This was an exceptionally poor family, and a family that was on the go, on the move, unsettled, and hard to track. His wife was not hard to track, though. Teresa O'Day Lynch, his wife, all the information that I looked here, all matched. It was such good information that it took me to where she was from. She was the child of immigrants. She wasn't an immigrant. She came from Lower Manhattan. When she grew up, they were building the Brooklyn Bridge. She lived on the edge of a very tough neighborhood, 5 Points, where the Gangs of New York is based on that neighborhood. Tough, tough. They came a generation earlier, though. They were victims of the potato famine. And when they were depicted, these people were depicted in the newspapers and magazines, they were often depicted as either really, really poor or kind of suspicious. That man. America's publishing and illustrators took the stereotype of the Irish immigrant from the way they were depicted in London, and that was an ape-like, less white character. He doesn't, the headline is just, among the poor in 5 Points, but that man, I'm not sure I feel good about that guy. Again, the information was so useful, though, that I was able to pinpoint where my great-great-grandmother came from. Shandrum Kilgarvan Kerry. She came when she was 9 years old with her mother. The entire family was wiped out by the potato famine, but she came with her mother and a sister. All the red here means death in the next generation. People died at very young ages back then, especially when you were poor. And I found out something that really knocked me on my, it knocked me. That is, that they come to America, they were sent to America. Their landlord thought it would be much cheaper and more cost efficient to just take the poor and starving people on their estate in Ireland, put them on a boat, and send them to New York. That would be so much cheaper than helping them and feeding them. This was not uncommon. This is a famous Lansdowne estate. So my family really just got sent there. And back then, say nice things about immigrants back then. And they was me, or they was us back then. Where they lived, the slum that they lived in, or the terrible neighborhood they lived in, was wiped away by urban renewal in New York. Now there's towers, and also lots of courthouses are there. This is a big area of city government down there. But wait, I know you can't wait. And my clicker, there goes my clicker. More fashion from the Lynches. My aunt, my Aunt Edna at some point said to me, I know about your project. I've been thinking. I think the Lynches came from some place that rhymed with kerosene. And I thought, duly noted. Like, I'm looking around the entire country. Lynch is it's one of the most common names in Ireland, and it's not a regional name. So I'm looking everywhere, and she gives me kerosene. But my father, a little while later, my father said, wait a minute, I think Michael had a brother and a sister living in New London. And I thought, you're telling me that now? So having had a big dead end with Michael, I decided to race down to New London. And when I was down in New London, I found records that said there was a Mary and there was a John Lynch, and they did match around the same age, and they were from Ireland, and they were living together in New London. Racing to City Hall, I found out when they died, they had the same names as Michael Lynch's parents. Not only that, but they said the parents were buried in Norwich, Connecticut. They weren't in Ireland. The next generation was in Norwich, Connecticut, which led me to Norwich, which led me to a gravestone with John Lynch and Mary Sullivan, which matches the parents, where it says of Caersaveen, County Kerry, Ireland. Thank you. Yeah, why weren't you clapping when that took 6 years? That broke it wide open. Turns out a whole family came over. Whole family of Lynches came over together, including Michael Lynch. Michael Lynch went off to Rhode Island. He was just a branch hanging over a fence. The entire in southeastern Connecticut. I'm related to everyone in that area, it turns out. Because what else you also notice is entire communities from the old country would come to the new country and link in. You know this from your families. But everyone from the region of Caersaveen, when they went to America, they followed other people that came from Caersaveen, which all led them to Westerly, New London, Norwich, Groton, that area. They all were down there. Tons of them were down there. I went down and I drew where they came in at Castle Gardens, and that was wonderful, seeing people getting their citizenship. But then I found a newspaper article of exactly the boat that they came on. The exact article about the boat, saying a boat just came, and it said very unflattering things about my relatives. It turns out the Lynches did not choose to come to America. They were sent to America. They were another generation later that were put on a boat because they were poor and sent to America. There was a second potato famine in the 1880s. My family, the Lynches, were kicked off their land for not paying the rent. You couldn't own land if you were Catholic in Ireland. The land was owned predominantly by wealthy Anglo-Irish and English landlords. and they were sent to America. And the article is about how they are not sending us their best. These were paupers. They were also my family. And it turns out, on Finding Your Roots, the actor Nathan Lane's family were on the exact same boat. Extraordinary. So if you see that episode, he's stunned to find out that his relatives were on this boat where people were sent to New York because they were poor. They emptied the poorhouses and put them on boats and gave them an offer they couldn't refuse. They said, "You won't owe us any more money. Bye." And then they knocked down your house as soon as you left. Not that you could afford to come back anyway. So where did the Lynches come from? Oh my God, oh my God. Rhodes, Caerseveen, County Kerry, Ireland. A mystical land on the coast of Dingle Bay. It looks too good to be true, right? It looks beautiful. That's our square right there. That's our square. And I went there and I drew. And the crumbling remains of my ancestors who lived on that plot of land is still there. And surrounding them are people that I haven't quite connected to that are all Lynches. I had found the land of the Lynches. There was no doubt about it. And I want to read you about my wife and I's arrival at this place on the first day. I'm coming back. I'm the first person to come back. The first Lynch to come back. The land never had any more Lynches. It's just sheep now, and it's empty, and there's no homes. It's just crumbled homes. It's owned by Joe the farmer, Joe Sullivan, who kindly let me walk in his fields. It says, in a sloping rocky field in southwest Ireland lie the crumbling remains of 3 stone cottages. To the 4 sheep who currently live there, they probably hold very little interest. But to me, they are everything. Finding them was like discovering Pompeii, or perhaps Tutankhamun's tomb. My quest took years of research, and although it was certainly not as dangerous as finding the source of the Nile, it was indeed thrilling to find the source of the Lynches, my Lynches. This was the home of my ancestors who left this land in 1881 and then left Ireland, probably the poorhouse, in 1884 for America. Any possibilities for a future here had been exhausted. They surrendered to emigration and yet still identified with this place proudly, as evidenced in the gravestones in the United States that still say Caerseveen. I was the first to return to this forgotten spot 138 years later. Drawing is paying very close attention. Never has a pile of rocks been so meaningful to me. Approaching Rhodes, that's the name of the neighborhood, the small neighborhood from which the Lynches had left, we passed through Kells Bay, a connected village overlooking Dingle Bay. My wife and I were milling around before moving into our rented cottage for a week. By the water is a hidden ancient graveyard, which I had read about, reserved for babies who passed away before baptism. It's a somber place with small, unmarked stones in places of burial. Certainly ancestors of mine lay there. As we meandered in, a man with a large, very loud grass trimmer was cutting weeds. We exchanged polite waves. Moments later, the buzzing stopped, and the man approached us saying, "Karen? Fred?" It took a second, but it occurred to me that this must be a man named Brian Lynch, a local cheesemaker. Responded on social media. His family, too, had a long history in the area, but I've yet to prove any relation. That said, his ancestors lived in the field next to my ancestors. He walked up to us, extended his hand, saying, "Welcome home." I know, right? There's Brian with a big chunk of cheese. Bay cheese, people, order now. It isn't in America. boy, when I read about this place, it's a tough place. It was a really tough place. A bleaker and less inviting spot. It would be difficult to imagine it was described. The ground is spongy and rocky, and it's exposed to all the weather. But that didn't stop me from sitting and drawing these places in wonder. This is the burial ground of many of the Lynches. Most of the graves are unmarked. Many are just rocks. They would just have a rock and they would know where it was. But there were lots of Lynches there, but I don't know any of them that were directly connected to me. Building on the bush on the top left, there was no wind that day. So that gives you an idea of what the weather is like there. It's like a funnel. They lived between the mountains and the sea. It's a hauntingly beautiful place. I hope this works. You ready? You ready? You ready? I bet it won't work. Here's me drawing. Owen Lynch with the drone, ladies and gentlemen. I contacted the press and said, would you be interested in this? And boy, they miss us as much as we miss them. They were to talk about the connection. Okay, I know, it's getting late, and you're saying, hey, Winchester, right? This is the Winchester Historical Society. Who said anything about Ireland? I'd love to make a connection to, I'd love to try to make a connection to Winchester, but I'm from Rhode Island. Maybe we can try through the Colburns. It's a long shot at best. You see, the Colburns are from River Phillip, Nova Scotia, a land of tall trees and strong women, you know? My great-grandfather Clinton Edward Colburn and my great-grandmother Alberta Caroline Ripley, they came down. They had a very different experience coming to America. They slid right in from Nova Scotia. He joined the Masons. They were Protestant. They joined the Masons. He was in the building trades, and before long, he was a building inspector for the city of Providence. There's the strong people of Nova Scotia, where it's very cold. They lived up there at the top of Nova Scotia. And here's the house that my great-grandfather came from. It's a Colburn house. And just like the Lynch place, this is a land of Colburns. There's a Colburn still living in this house. There's Colburns up and down the street. And there's Ripleys everywhere, believe it or not. There's Ripleys, no, I'm serious. There's Ripleys all over this street. And when I came to this house almost by luck, they pulled out a picture of my great-great-grandfather, Everett Ripley. And we're practically twins. But you know what I learned up there? I learned that, of course, people in Nova Scotia aren't from Nova Scotia. They're from someone else. And my grandmother said, oh, I'm Nova Scotia Scottish. She was very little Scottish. She might have said I'm Nova Scotia Scottish because the arch enemy of my grandfather was the English because of how they were treated. That's a theory. There's only one family that I have found that came from Scotland. The Ripleys came from Yorkshire, and they were living on the same plot of land since 1705. What I found out was a huge amount of my ancestors were from New England. They were people that were either loyalists on the wrong side of the American Revolution, or they were New England planters who went earlier and replaced when the French Canadians were driven out of that area, northern of Nova Scotia, they were offered land and plopped right in from New England, which meant I was a Puritan. I didn't know I was a Puritan. I came from Puritan stock all over the place because there weren't that many people back then. So there was tons of intermarriaging. And I found out that I really had connections here. The founders of York, Maine included were the Dixons and the Moores, my 9th and 8th great-grandparents. Sudbury was founded by a lot of my ancestors, including who owned a tavern on that spot. Be careful, this is if you go past bushes, I would say be careful. I would say be careful. Abraham and Sarah Hill owned the Hill Tavern, the first tavern in Malden, and that was in 1645. In 1635, we're getting early now. 1635, Robert and Elizabeth Long lived in Charlestown, and their Three Cranes Tavern is on the Freedom Trail. I'm on the Freedom Trail. None of this is expected. So, and it's really, really quite fascinating. This tavern ended up going through generations of Longs and then was sold to other people and was burned down in the Battle of Bunker Hill. And that's talked about at that site. It's where Olives used to be, the restaurant Olives used to be. And yes, I can trace myself to the oldest timber-framed house in America, it is believed, and that's in Dedham, of Jonathan and Grace Fairbanks, who would be my 11th great-grandparents. It's a beautiful house. It's really fun to see this house. Finding these people was so much easier than finding the Lynches, because I follow in the footsteps of tons of professional genealogists who have been tracing the Puritans and the Pilgrims. I find my information in books like this one, Our Early Immigrant Ancestors, the original list, quality. I can tell you no one called my Irish ancestors persons of quality. Never happened. Oh, I know, you're jealous. I'm very related to the President Millard Fillmore, so I've got that going for me. He's the 9th president of the United States. The Fillmores went to Nova Scotia, so he's really related to me. His grandfather's house is down in Connecticut. I went down and drew it. His grandfather was 6th great-grandfather. So that makes him, I don't know, I forgot. But I went to the house and it's there. It's still standing and it's got nice historic markers. And yeah, I did the work. Okay, this is all real. And but I should tell you, when I say that's my 6th great-grandfather, you should know that all of us have 256 6th great-grandfathers. So all this time I've been getting way too much credit because the house of my 11th great-grandparents, I have 8,192 11th great-grandparents. Let's imagine how many kids they had. And then I'm an artist, I don't do math, but I think you know where this goes. We are related to a vast number of people. We are wildly interrelated. And I am absolutely positive that a fellow cousin of Millard Fillmore sits among us. There's no question in my mind. Does anyone already know this? Because I tell you, don't put your hand up yet. Millard Fillmore is always voted as one of the worst presidents in the United States. He is tied for 7th right now. He used to be worse, but now he's been moving on up, and I don't know if he's going to crack the top 10, the 10th worst in my lifetime, but I would hold your fire on putting that on your business card right now. With this research comes all the baggage that you realize, not just the sympathy for your relatives, but the complications of of your relatives, right? So all of my founders of these towns were also the pushers of the natives out of the areas that formed those towns. And it's really eye-opening to read the stories and look at the old documents where they refer to the natives as savages and such. And the picture comes to mind of the pictures of the Irishmen drawn as savages as well. That this is a cycle, right? The Weatherheads came later, and they came from the most privileged of any family that I've linked myself to, I think. They were in London. They came over later than my others. They came in the 1742, I guess, or 1741, something like that. And it turns out they had, the father of Samuel Weatherhead's father had blown all their money in a East Indies investment scheme. And they were given like the amount of equal to $400,000 to go to Boston and try something new. And with all this money, and went into the tavern business, and eventually Samuel Weatherhead owned the very famous tavern of Boston called the Bunch of Grapes Tavern, which is where the first meeting ever by the Masons was, and lots of other historic things happened there. But I found a very uncomfortable thing in the Harvard records, and that is that they had slave auctions there. Not at the time of my great-great-grandfather, but that made me very uncomfortable, but not half as uncomfortable as finding out in the Boston Globe that there was another place to find information about slave owners in Boston, and Samuel Weatherhead enslaved two people, a man named Essex and a woman named Sarah, who were in his probate records, along with his horse, his carriage, and a gold watch. When Samuel Weatherhead was buried in the crypt of the very famous chapel, they didn't have enough money to cover it. He had been deceiving the fact that he was in deep debt. That's why they had to there was a court case that uncovered all his assets to settle it. Oh, that's right, Winchester. All right, so Winchester, what can we do? Well, it turns out that my great-grandmother's, my great-great-grandmother's brother lived in Winchester. He worked in 1870 at Right Lock Farm. Not bad, right? We're here. And also worked in a piano case factory on Canal Street off of Main Street up near at the end of Swanton. So there we go. We have found the Winchester connection. He lived here. His first wife died young. She's buried in Winchester Cemetery. I've seen the stone. He moved on to work in Lynn and died there. And I don't hear anyone seeming impressed. No, I can do this. I'm going to try again. Do you guys know the first house ever in Winchester was built by Edward Converse? That was the father-in-law of my 9th great-grandaunt. Thank you. Thank you. I know. I don't have to draw it. It's already done. You see, I can show the work. Edward Converse's son, who grew up in that first house in Winchester, was James Converse, buried he lived across the street from Otavila. I don't know if he did karate, but he was right near the karate place. And when you follow these, you can follow all the way up to Nova Scotia, then all the way down to New England. And Anne Lang was the daughter of the Charlestown tavern owner. She was his second wife after childbearing age. So there are nothing follows there. I'm not related to anybody after James. I'm not related genetically to the Converses, but hey, I got to the house. The wife definitely went to the house, like for the holidays or something. So I don't know if I can top that. Let me try one more thing. So what's the name of this building?
The Sanborn.
Sanborn House. All right, let's try this. So the Sanborns built this house 20. Is that right?
No.
1906.
Yeah,
Sorry, it's right there. 1906, they built this house. And it's nice, and it feels, I don't know, it just feels right. You know what I mean? And it turns out that Orrin Cheney Sanborn, who built that house, was my 8th cousin 3 times removed. Huh? Not bad, and I can show you the work, but boy, is it a deep ride. Like, it goes all the way up and all the way down, and I don't know any of those people at all. It just, if you have a family like I do, and trust me, we're almost near the end, so hang in there. If you have a family tree like I have, where you spent so much time finding the houses that you could draw, my family tree is so big that if you put it connect it to the family trees of others on Family Search, there's almost like a simple button that you hit. It will tell you if the huge family tree has any link to yours. So this is a matter of just pressing the button. It takes 10 years to build your tree. But once you have that 10-year tree, you can trick it. And it's endlessly fascinating to me and endlessly boring to my children, but I'm trying that all the time, you know, like I was like, ooh, Abraham Lincoln, you know, and Abraham Lincoln came up, no Abraham Lincoln, but Mary Todd Lincoln is somehow related to me. So, in conclusion, I guess my name is Fred Lynch, and I can say I'm from Winchester now. But I come from a lot of places, and I come from a lot of people, which leads me to the question. Thank you.
You want to take any questions?
Sure, it's 11:45.
Yeah.
So if anybody has a question with a one-word answer, I'm happy to answer it. Questions, anyone? They're speechless.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm also Irish, so I absolutely loved your presentation.
Thank you.
A lot of similarities. Maybe we're related.
Wait.
Anyway,
Pro-
I've been curious about the potato famine and how
Yeah.
difficult any information around that time was to find.
Right, so it's actually well documented. Yes. The records kind of stop around 1850, however, and the potato famine was 1847 to 1850, 51. So there's a slight vague area there for anyone who died in the potato famine. It's really hard to find those people, but it's quite, not easy, but doable if they survived the potato famine. Yes, you can find those people. And then through those people, you find others. Yep. Ireland is increasing the number of records they found. The tragedy of Ireland, if not one of many, is that in the Irish Revolution, they had an extraordinary wealth of records that were kept by the British. And in the independence, the building burned down. And whenever you say that and make that expression, they all try to look at the bright side and say, but we got our freedom, you know? And you're like, yeah, but okay, you know? So, yeah. Yeah. Oh, thank you. It was the Irish Civil War when that burned down. Thank you. It was right, the two are like right next door neighbors of each other. Yeah. They're within a decade of each other. Yep.
Fred, this was awesome.
Thank you.
I'm curious how you complete one of your drawings.
Oh, wow. So when I'm walking around with a humble book with drawings in them. And I work on, these are Irish drawings. I'm going too fast. But these are all in a book, and I'll find one that didn't work out. I don't like drawings that don't work out. Well, I start with just a few lines. You can't even see that. That's not helpful. I'm flawless. I can't find one. Okay, so here's something that I was drawing. This is how I start. hour and a half just sitting there drawing this. Then I take lots and lots of photographs. Oh, hi, Chris. They take lots of photographs, and then I work for another bunch of hours on those. So I'm on site for about an hour and a half or 2 hours. By then, the sun has moved, and the clouds have come, or death threats. And then I take it home and work it in my special workshop. So it's hours and hours. Many hours. They're not magic. Oh, thank you. Every day for your whole life, you get the hang of it. You get the hang of it. But believe me, it's all work, and every single one bothers me at some point. I say, well, this one isn't going to work. And it always ends up in the same place. So that's experience.
Did you leverage like DNA sort of research and follow those tracks?
Yeah, I did a lot of DNA research, particularly on the Lynches, which confirmed that they were from that part of Ireland. And really, it can get quite specific with Ancestry.com. And it gets better all the time. Yep. Yes?
Is there anything you learned that could save, like, if I wanted to start doing that and take less than 10 years, is there anything you learned?
Don't draw at all the houses. Stay home. Yeah, I mean, I would. So the best way to do it is just to start with yourself and work backwards. The latest census that's out is 1950. 1950. And then people don't move that much or that radically. You can just kind of move back from there. And all those are online. And I think familysearch.com or Family Search is the best place to go, and it's free. It's connected to Ancestry.com, and it is connected with the Mormon Church is very interested in genealogy. But Family Search is free, and if you call up, you take the information you have and you just go back in time. Sounds easier than it is, because you might find they gave you all the wrong years. That's why that took so long. Not everybody takes that long. Any other questions at all? Oh, good. Thank you very much. Thank you.